There was a time when I thought I could read a child's friendships like an open book. You see them play together, laugh together, maybe even argue a little, and you assume you understand what's going on beneath it all. But modern friendships, they don't sit still long enough to be read anymore. One week, your child is inseparable from someone they call their best friend forever. The next week, there's silence, tension, or a new name replacing the old one like nothing ever happened. And if you ask too many questions, you either get a shrug or a door quietly closing in your face. I've learned something uncomfortable over the years. Children don't just have friends, they become different versions of themselves inside those friendships. And most of the time, parents are watching the surface while the real story is happening underneath it. What makes it even more complicated is that friendship today isn't just about who sits next to who in class. It stretches into messages, group chats, inside jokes you'll never hear, and invisible social rules that shift faster than adults can track. So the real question isn't who are your child's friends, it's what kind of version of your child is being shaped inside those friendships, and are you close enough to notice before it sticks? Because once you start missing that, you're no longer guiding their friendships. You're reacting to them after they've already taken root. When I first started paying closer attention to children's friendships, I realized something that most adults underestimate. Friendships are not just social activities for a child, they are emotional ecosystems. And inside those ecosystems, a child learns who they are allowed to be and who they must become to be accepted. It starts early, sometimes earlier than parents expect. A child doesn't wake up one morning and consciously decide, I will now shape my identity based on my friends. No, it happens gradually, almost invisibly. A joke they repeat to fit in, a personality trait they exaggerate because it gets laughs, a belief they soften because it causes disagreement. Small adjustments repeated often until they stop feeling like adjustments at all. From a psychological standpoint, this is tied to how the adolescent brain is wired. The reward system is extremely sensitive to social acceptance at this stage. So, when a child gets approval from peers, even something as simple as being included in a group chat or laughed with at the right moment, it activates a strong internal reward response. That feeling doesn't just stay in the moment, it teaches the brain this environment is safe, stay here, adapt to it. And here is where many parents get caught off guard. Because while a child is biologically wired to prioritize belonging, parents are still operating from an adult assumption that friendship is just companionship. So when behavior starts shifting, tone of voice, interests, even attitude at home, it is often mistaken for rudeness, phase, or hormones, when in reality, it may be identity alignment with a peer group. I remember noticing how quickly a child can begin to mirror the emotional rhythm of their friends. If the group is loud, everything becomes louder. If the group is dismissive or sarcastic, the child adopts that same edge. Not because they are becoming bad, but because adaptation is the price of belonging at that age. What makes it even more delicate is that children rarely announce these changes. There is no formal update, no meeting, no explanation. It simply unfolds in behavior first and understanding later. And by the time parents finally notice, the friendship has already stopped being just a connection. It has become a framework for identity. The tricky part about children's friendships is that adults often assume they fall into neat categories: good friends, healthy influence, bad influence. But in real life, especially in adolescent psychology, friendships rarely cooperate with that kind of labeling. They operate in layers. The first layer is what I call the safe friendship. These are the ones where your child can relax without performing. There's laughter, shared interests, and a sense of emotional ease. These friendships usually support stability at home too. You notice your child is generally calmer after interacting with these friends. There is no constant emotional spike, no confusion, no need to decode behavior afterward. Then there is the high intensity friendship. This one is far more complicated. Everything is amplified: loyalty, attention, emotional dependence. One day they are inseparable, the next day there is tension that feels almost dramatic for no clear reason. Then there is the high intensity friendship. This one is far more complicated. Everything is amplified: loyalty, attention, emotional dependence. One day they are inseparable, the next day there is tension that feels almost dramatic for no clear reason. Adults often dismiss this as immaturity, but psychologically, this is where identity experimentation is at its peak. Children in these friendships are not just connecting, they are negotiating status, belonging, and emotional dominance without having the vocabulary to explain it. And then there is the layer that most parents dread but don't always recognize quickly enough: the influence driven friendship. This is where the child begins to adjust behavior not from comfort, but from pressure. It doesn't always look like obvious peer pressure either. Sometimes it is subtle: what they laugh at, what they stop talking about at home, how quickly they adopt group opinions. It can be quiet, almost polite on the surface, which is exactly why it slips under parental radar. Now, here is where things get psychologically interesting. A child can move between these layers with the same group of friends. That's what confuses adults the most. A friendship that looks harmless on Monday can feel emotionally heavy by Friday, not because the friends changed overnight, but because group dynamics inside adolescent circles are fluid and constantly renegotiated. Social hierarchy plays a role too. Even among friends, there is often an unspoken structure: who leads, who follows, who gets included first, who is tolerated, and who is at risk of exclusion. Children are extremely sensitive to this structure, even when they pretend not to be, and they will adjust themselves quietly to maintain their position within it. What parents often miss is that their child is not just choosing friends, they are also learning how to survive inside those friendships. The most common mistake I see adults make when it comes to their children's friendships is assuming that visibility equals understanding. Just because you know who your child is hanging out with does not mean you understand what that relationship is doing to them. In fact, some of the most influential friendships are the least visible ones emotionally. A child can sit at your dining table, laugh at your jokes, answer your questions politely, and still be carrying a completely different emotional identity shaped by their peer group. One of the biggest missteps is over monitoring. I've seen parents try to solve friendships like they are equations, checking phones aggressively, interrogating every new name, or banning certain friends outright. What usually happens is predictable. Children don't stop the behavior, they just become more skilled at hiding it. Trust doesn't disappear, it simply goes underground. On the other side, there is the opposite extreme: complete emotional detachment. The idea that they will figure it out themselves sounds respectful, but adolescent psychology doesn't work in isolation like that. Children are still developing emotional judgment. Leaving them entirely unanchored in complex peer environments is not freedom, it is exposure without guidance. Another subtle error is minimizing friendships too early. Saying things like, they'll grow out of it, or it's just school drama, might sound reassuring, but to a child, those words often translate as, this is not important enough for you to understand. And when something feels dismissed, it rarely disappears. It just stops being shared. Then there is the more delicate mistake: trying to become your child's friend. On the surface, it feels modern and emotionally intelligent, but psychologically, it blurs boundaries that children actually depend on. A child does not need a second peer. They need an emotionally stable reference point. When that line becomes too soft, children can start filtering their emotions to protect the relationship rather than expressing themselves honestly. The irony is that most of these mistakes come from care. Parents are trying to either protect, liberate, or connect. But without balance, Even good intentions can distort the very space where a child is learning how to relate to others. And that is where the real challenge begins. Not controlling friendships, not ignoring them, but learning how to stay emotionally present without becoming emotionally intrusive. At the end of the day, what I've learned about children's friendships is this: you don't really manage them the way you manage rules or schedules. You observe them, you guide around them, and you stay close enough emotionally that your child doesn't feel alone while navigating them, because friendships will always matter more to a child than adults expect. They're where confidence is tested, where identity is shaped, and where emotional habits quietly form, both the healthy ones and the painful ones. If there's one thing I would leave you with, it's this: don't rush to control the friendship, and don't rush to dismiss it either. Instead, pay attention to what your child becomes around certain people. That version of them tells you more than the names ever will. And sometimes the most powerful parenting moment is not the intervention, it's the conversation your child feels safe enough to start on their own. Now I'm curious, have you ever noticed a friendship change your child in a way you didn't expect? Or maybe you realized something only after it was already influencing them. Share your experience in the comments. I read them, and I often respond personally when I can. If this resonated with you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. It helps keep these conversations going and brings more parents into a space where we can all learn how to better understand what our children are really going through.